How's it going, everybody? It's Riley's Redzone here, back with another Red Zone's roster previews episode. And in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the Dallas Cowboys. So, in every single episode of this series, I take a look at every player and I predict whether they will make the roster, have an impact on the team, make the practice squad, or be cut from the team. I also take a look at their schedule. I predict how many wins they can get. And I also give awards out to players who are fitting the category and I think will perform up to the challenge. So, like in previous episodes, I'm going to jump right into talking about the Dallas Cowboys, starting with the coaching staff before we even get into the players and the culture and what is going on here with the Dallas Cowboys. So, they have Mike McCarthy, who they hired last year. He then spent the previous year not coaching, and before that he was the Packers coach. So he has coaching experience. Now last year, the Cowboys did not necessarily perform very well. They didn't make the playoffs or anything, but they also were without their quarterback for a long, long time. So I'm honestly not super confident in Mike McCarthy, but I would be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt for last season. So I'm not scrapping last season, but I'm kind of setting it aside. I think that this year is finally he gets a chance of a fair shot with his quarterback, perhaps an improved defense with Dan Quinn. We'll see what happens there. But I'm giving Mike McCarthy a shot this year, and I think this will be closer to what he truly can do for a team. And now I don't think he is an elite coach at all. I don't think he's going to be able to elevate a team by himself. But maybe the players, like on this team, that they have a lot of talented players, maybe perhaps can be enough to carry a team into the playoffs and perhaps farther. So, speaking of the players, let's transition into the players, starting with the quarterback position. Let's talk about Dak Prescott, a very interesting player to talk about because he has had a lot of news over the past year or so. Last season, he starts out on fire, like one of the top yards overall statistically in the league. He was having a really, really good year. But then he has a terrible ankle injury. I remember where I was on that day. It was a very bad injury that he dealt with and was out for the rest of the season. And it seemed as though he was making a solid recovery this offseason with the ankle. And he was getting back in practice, making some throws. Perhaps the momentum was going into the season. But then, recently, he then dealt with a shoulder injury. I've not had a chance to watch Hard Knocks, but it sounds like there was a quote saying, like, I want to be out there the whole time, is what Dak was saying. Well, perhaps it didn't maybe pay off right now because he is dealing with a shoulder injury. And it's an interesting injury. This is a little bit older news, but they at one point started consulting with baseball teams to get an idea of how to heal this because it's a throwing, a shoulder is, even on both arms, so no matter what arm it is, I mean, your shoulder is involved for either of them. And so if I were a quarterback, a shoulder on either shoulder would probably not be ideal to me for an injury. And so you definitely shut him down for the preseason, that's for sure. But then I think you just got to rest him because you need Dak. You just paid him a lot of money. You need Dak if you want any shot of getting wins and potentially making the playoffs or farther. So I just would let him rest, get to a decent spot because I said this earlier this offseason, and I'm going to forever say this. They were in a situation with Dak where I would say at this point in his career, he's probably about a top 10 quarterback. For sure not top 5. But this is what I think basically. Combined with Mike McCarthy, I don't know if Dak is ever going to be able to take a team to a Super Bowl. And this team, at least, I can see. But the problem is he's good enough that if you decide to let him go, you got to start over. And the chances of even hitting they took him in the 4th, 5th round, and he ended up turning out. That was a miracle. The chances of hitting on a first round quarterback even to do as well as what Dak is, pretty rare. So you needed to do whatever you could to keep him, even though I don't know if he's a top 5 quarterback ever going to be, potentially not a Super Bowl winning quarterback. But if you don't keep him, you're back to square one, and you can't do that. So he's a fine quarterback overall. He's always going to be great statistically, great option for fantasy. I think he's solid all around, pretty mobile. But I think you need to get him back from this injury correctly. So I'm doing whatever I can just to basically put him on ice and just let him recover. Then we have a competition for the backup spot. And I would say that at this point, Garrett Gilbert's job to lose. Garrett Gilbert has gotten time in the preseason, and he has been spectacular, but not bad. And he's probably the favorite to win this backup job because he did have a start last year against the Steelers where he did okay. And they lose Andy Dalton. I was shocked they didn't go out and try to get another quarterback in the mix. But it seems as well like it was maybe going to be a competition with Cooper Rush potentially for the backup. But on the depth chart, it seems as though Ben DiNucci has taken over Cooper Rush. So to me, it's Garrett Gilbert's job to lose for the backup spot. And I honestly don't feel incredibly confident with that. He has limited starting experience, but one start to me, he's been around the league on a number of teams. And I don't feel great about that. I was shocked they didn't go out and get another quarterback. They have Ben DiNucci, who, is a pretty big meme, but all around, he's an okay quarterback, potentially a guy to develop into a backup. I mean, he has not performed well when given opportunities. I think he sometimes tries to be a little too fancy with his sidearms and everything. Tries to be Patrick Mahomes, but he's not Patrick Mahomes. So I am keeping him on the practice squad just because I feel like why not give him another shot to develop, but I was shocked the Cowboys didn't go out and get somebody else. They still have Cooper Rush, who, as I said, kind of has fallen down the depth chart. And so that's going to bring him from a practice squad or potentially backup player to a cut for me. So you have Dak, but if this is another reason, not only because we need Dak to perform well, but if he does get hurt, you have nothing behind him. So at all costs, you have to keep Dak healthy. For whatever it takes, you need to get him back to 100% and keep him healthy. Moving on to the running back spot, Ezekiel Elliott. Looking for a bounce back year. I feel like he's been on his way back up. It looks like he's actually in pretty good shape this offseason, and he's been training hard. And so I do think that he does take a step up this year. I feel like given more opportunity as well with a healthy quarterback will help him out a bit. To get his quarterback back is important. But he all around, in retrospect, to think how high he was drafted, I don't know if you always want to take a running back that high, but he's been pretty good in his career. And at this point, I feel like he is a borderline top 5 back. He's for sure between 5 and 10. I would say at this point in his career, has a good amount of power still. And I think that maybe a little more quickness can help him out. But he's going to be more just kind of, I feel like, power at this point in his career. And because behind him, they have Tony Pollard, who is speed. He is a nice backup player who can run to the outside, given open space. He was kind of a receiver at Memphis. It seems to be the case with almost every running back, wide receiver they take out of there. From him, Antonio Gibson, Kenneth Gainwell this year, Darrell Henderson even was involved in the receiving game and in speed. I think that's kind of, he fits that Memphis running back mold, and he offers a good amount of explosion from the backfield. And then I like to keep 4 running backs normally, but they just kind of don't have the depth here, so I'm keeping Rico Dowdle, who was an undrafted rookie last year out of South Carolina. He has looked good this preseason. He looked good in the Hall of Fame game, and I feel like he's been the most explosive on this backup level here. So I think that he has made his case to be on the roster. I don't know how much he really will get in the rotation, but has proved why he potentially deserves a spot on this team. I also have Jaquan Hardy now on the practice squad. I feel like he's performed very well this preseason. Outperformed my expectations, so I'm giving him a shot to just stick around and develop, and I have him cutting the other players. So Zeke is really solid at this point in his career. I do think he has a bounce-back season, but he is not a crazy elite running back at this point in his career, but I also like Tony Pollard as a backup. So I think you're looking good there at running back. Let's move to the receivers, where this top three is one of the best, if not the best trio in the entire NFL. It is unbelievable. Solid players of different skill sets. It's afterwards they have a little competition here. But starting with Amari Cooper, he, I think, is a solid number one receiver. Not elite, like I would say borderline top 10, not quite. But he's a solid number one receiver, and that's all you really are asking for, especially since CeeDee Lamb is going to develop into an absolute star. I love that pick last year. He really performed well, and I think that someday this can be his wide receiver one spot. So I expect another great year from CeeDee. It's kind of hard to say breakout given how well he played last year. They also have Michael Gallup, who is a solid another receiving option overall. He did have that, I think it was, he actually got hurt where he flipped over a fence this offseason while practicing catching a touchdown. But I think that trio is very, very good. They all can run routes well and make some pretty good catches. A lot of security there for Dak. Then it's every single spot after, the entire depth chart afterwards is pretty open. They have Cedric Wilson, who has performed really well this preseason, is why I'm confident in him. And he offers special teams ability as well and a good amount of speed, so I actually feel pretty good in him making the roster. I think he's made a solid case. Noah Brown I have staying, but he will have to prove some special teams ability. And then I have them keeping Simi Fehoko, who they took in the draft this year out of Stanford. I'm keeping him for that reason. I just feel like they spent capital on him. You might as well keep him. He's kind of that stereotypical Stanford slot receiver. He just is, I think, going to maybe need an impact on special teams as well. Potentially another competition with Cedric Wilson for that return spot, potentially. I have been keeping Aaron Parker on the practice squad. I liked him coming out of Rhode Island last year. I think he will be given more opportunities this year in the preseason, which is great for him. He has performed pretty well. So to me, it makes sense to keep him on the practice squad. So I'm keeping him because he's young and has a good amount of jump ball ability. Malik Turner, I have been cut just barely, but I feel like Wilson offers you special teams ability. Fehoko offers you slot and special teams ability. So to me, that competition will be between Noah Brown and Malik Turner for that other spot. It's whoever can offer more in special teams. So otherwise, they have a lot of other players that are competing for spots, but just not enough spots really to me that are open. So to conclude that, one of the best trios in the league. And then you're looking maybe just for who can play the best on special teams to really see who can make the roster besides that. The tight end position is another interesting one because Blake Jarwin was hurt for all of last year with an injury. He missed the entire season pretty much. And Dalton Schultz came in there, performed relatively well. But Blake Jarwin will probably have the opportunity to be here first. But I think people thought he was going to break out last year. Obviously, he couldn't because he was hurt. Maybe you get that this year out of him. Dalton Schultz is, I'd say, safer than Blake Jarwin, so he doesn't have the upside, though, which is concerning. Because I feel like you want an explosive offense. I think Jarwin gives you the most opportunity for that. And in a competition for that third spot, you got Jeremy Sprinkle, who they bring in from Washington. I feel like he might need to be the blocker in this room. And then they also have Sean McKeon, who has actually performed very well this preseason and has proved to me to for sure be a practice squad, if not roster level player for this team. So they also have a few other younger players behind that, but you have this tight end competition. Jarwin definitely has the higher upside. Schultz is safer. I'm going with Jarwin to start, and if he isn't doing anything, you can go to Dalton Schultz, but I don't think either of them, though, personally, are the future of this tight end room, no matter what. So I think you go with these guys for a year and then see what happens next year. The offensive line is pretty solid overall. I feel there's not a name on that list that I have on the roster where I say, well, does he deserve to be on a roster? Tyron Smith at one point was perhaps the, if not one of the best left tackles in the league. I would say he has fallen off a bit, but he still is a great left tackle, and you feel very, very solid with him there. And I think he just is one of the best left tackles in the league still overall. They also have Connor Williams, came out of Texas a few years ago. It's so interesting. He came out of Texas as a tackle guard. Now he's playing left guard because that we've seen that before where it works out. This is a great example of a tackle playing guard. But then on the depth chart, they also have him listed as like backup center. So potentially he could be in the rotation in different spots, but I think you go with him at guard. There on the left side, Tyler Biadasz is a high upside player. I thought was going to be picked higher out of Wisconsin last year than he was. But they dealt with the retirement of Travis Frederick, and then Joe Looney left for the Giants this offseason, and he ended up retiring. So they really need Biadasz to step up, and I do believe he can do that. So I feel actually pretty good having Tyler Biadasz there, even though he does have limited experience. You also have Zach Martin, who is still one of the top guards in the league. I think Quentin Nelson, the two Notre Dame boys, have kind of taken over that guard spot. And Zach Martin is one of the best players in the NFL, but not only at this position, but just in general. So he's a lock, solid player at the right guard spot. You also have La'el Collins, who is a pretty solid right tackle. He has some strength, ability to pancake people, just great strength overall and ability to move, I would say, pretty well. So I feel absolutely great in 3 out of 5. I feel really confident in Williams, and I feel pretty good about Biadasz there. Then, looking at their depth, I'm keeping mostly tackles because that's just what they have for value there. Ty Nsekhe has been basically a right tackle his entire career, almost a swing guy, but they've been playing him at left tackle, not only in the preseason, but they have him listed there on the depth chart. Little shocked by that. He did not look good in the Steelers game. So I was shocked to see him maybe playing left tackle. That might still be what they do, but if I'm Dallas, I'm putting him on the right side and just having him be a swing tackle. I thought it was a solid signing. I just am shocked they're trying him at his unnatural position. Terrence Steele was a pretty good player last year as an undrafted free agent out of Texas Tech. He was one of my borderline roster players, and he ended up making it as an undrafted free agent last year. You also have Josh Ball, who they picked out of Marshall this year. Potentially could be a guard as well. Same with Brandon Knight, who is I feel like Brandon Knight can potentially be a solid swing guy. But those are players I'm keeping that have the tackle flexibility and the guard flexibility. And I'm keeping Connor McGovern. And the reason I'm only keeping him out on the interior is because those other guys can play guard. But also Connor McGovern can play both center and guard. So I feel confident in all these players on the offensive line. I've been keeping Matt Farniok on the practice squad. He was like their last pick in the 7th round as a guard. They just need numbers, even though he isn't that great. I'm going to keep him there on the practice squad. And then they have a few other players I have them cutting. But this is an absolutely solid offensive line. I would have to say it's probably one of the best ones in the league, and the depth is also very, very solid. So I feel absolutely confident in this offensive line. Now let's start talking about the defense, starting with their pass rushers. So let's start with DeMarcus Lawrence, who at one point was one of the top edge rushers in the entire league, had like above 10 sacks. Now I feel like he is still a very, very solid number 1 edge rusher. Maybe he isn't getting the attention he kind of deserves, but I feel like he's still perhaps the best defensive player on this team and one of the better edge rushers in the league. Then it's a question of who else can get reps here. You have Randy Gregory, who, they've dealt with so many suspensions and everything, but last year he played, and I think that this year he still has a chance to be the starting opposite DeMarcus Lawrence. So I actually feel pretty good about, because he has the experience here, potentially starting him. They bring in Terrell Basham, who I've liked for a long time as an underrated player. I think it was a solid signing from the Jets this year, started his career in Indianapolis. A quick guy, flexible, and I think that he has the potential to start if Gregory maybe doesn't perform. You also have Chauncey Golston, who is dealing with an injury right now. They took him pretty early in the draft this year out of Iowa, but he is dealing with an injury, but I feel like he's pretty much a lock to make this roster. I think he could potentially, maybe if he can stop the run pretty well, that could maybe be the carved out role for him. Then the competition, I'm keeping 5 edge rushers, is between Dorrance Armstrong, who they've been waiting on since they picked him out of Kansas. He just has not done a whole lot for them, but he actually performed pretty well in the past preseason game. So there's a competition there. You also have Bradley Anae, who had a great Senior Bowl last year. Pretty good sack production at Utah, but just did not get on the field. And I feel like, unfortunately, with the picks of Chauncey Golston, they bring in Terrell Basham. They also brought in some D tackles. Like, his role is starting to be kicked out. And unfortunately, I thought at the time, Bradley Anae was one of the biggest steals of the draft last year. But now, he hasn't really done much. I've been keeping Rondell Carter just as a developmental piece as well. Then I have them cutting Azir Kamara, who they have listed as a linebacker on the roster, but more with the defensive ends on the depth chart. So he can go either way, but no matter what, he's going to be a pass rusher. So I like this edge room a lot. Specifically, having DeMarcus Lawrence as a 1 is absolutely solid. And then the upside of Gregory is still there. I love the signing of Terrell Basham. And Chauncey Golston could potentially still develop into something. They just took him this year. So I like that edge room. They also have some solid defensive tackles. Starting with Neville Gallimore, another player who I thought was a steal in last year's draft. I thought they nailed last year's draft between Lamb, Gallimore, Bradley Anae, Tyler Biadasz. Just some great picks. I thought they absolutely nailed it. And so I think Neville Gallimore now, with the opportunity starting to finally arise for him, I think he can perform very, very well and prove why he was picked there, but I feel like he fell in the draft. They bring in Carlos Watkins from Houston. Very interesting pickup there. I feel like they brought in a few guys who were kind of 3-4-ish defensive ends between Carlos Watkins and Brent Urban. I feel like they're going to more so play a D tackle in this 4-3 scheme, though. So, interesting there. Yeah, between Carlos Watkins and Brent Urban, I absolutely love Brent Urban as a budget impact player. They also then have a few young guys, starting with Osa Odigizua, who they took out of UCLA this year pretty early in the draft. His upside is great. I love that could potentially be the future duo between him and Gallimore. 2 really good picks back-to-back years at that position. So he has high upside, but I feel like at the moment they're going to start Watkins or Urban. And then they also still have Tristan Hill, who might be on his way out. They took him relatively early out of UCF a few years ago and just has not done anything really for them. Had more injuries and everything, just kind of underwhelming. They took Quentin Bohanna later in the draft this year. I'm keeping him on the practice squad. So they just have a bunch of bodies that potentially you could get some upside between Gallimore and Odigizua. But otherwise, I think they're going to go with a veteran, with Watkins or Urban, who I like them both. Let's jump to the linebacker position, where this is absolutely loaded. I absolutely love this linebacker room. Starting with Jalen Smith, who can go sideline to sideline. Overall, I think he potentially, I don't know whether to say he's underrated or overrated, because loved him coming out of the draft. He had that unfortunate injury. He's performed pretty well since then. But overall, I think that he is not elite at much. His coverage ability is not spectacular, but his speed is solid, and that's what you need. Micah Parsons. The Cowboys have nailed the draft the past few years because they do things like this. They had no need for CeeDee Lamb last year. You might have been saying they had Mari Cooper and Michael Gallup. Well, what they did is they took the best player available. And look at how well that turned out. CeeDee Lamb was one of the best rookie receivers last year, and I think will blossom into one of the best receivers in the NFL. Micah Parsons is another example of this, where I truly believe in my entire heart the Cowboys were going to take a corner. Between Surtain and J.C. Horn, I thought they were going to end up with a corner. Then they both get picked, and it's like, oh, well, we're messed up. So then what they do is I believe they traded back, but early in the teens, they already had Jalen Smith. They already had Leighton Vander Esch. Two very, very good startable players. But they said, let's just get better. Let's go with Micah Parsons, who kind of slipped in the draft there a little bit. Micah Parsons has performed absolutely well in the preseason. In that Hall of Fame game, he was the first guy getting the ball on so many plays. He was flying all over the field. He had a fumble recovery. And what I love about Micah Parsons is his position flexibility. I believe that they can line him up on the edge for sure this season. He did that at Penn State. And watching him this year, he was absolutely explosive. He can be a game wrecker. He absolutely torched some offenses, and I think that could be the way they use him. It's kind of a hybrid outside player. They still have Leighton Vander Esch, who has dealt with injuries and still is kind of an injury concern, but given opportunities, he's been okay. I'd say he's kind of been on a downward spiral since his rookie year as a first-round pick, but he's got to be careful, too, because Jabril Cox, who's performed absolutely spectacular over the past few preseason games coming out of LSU this year, I like him a lot, is performing very well. So he could be up for that job soon as well. So I think that overall, Jabril Cox is proving why he should be in the rotation. They bring in Keanu Neal, a converted safety, a hard hitter. I like him playing linebacker, actually. I feel like it'll be able to give him more of his instincts, because he was an inside-the-box player anyways, more so than a coverage guy. So why not fully convert him to a linebacker? I like that. Then Francis Bernard, who came out of Utah last year, actually performed pretty well, and I think has proven himself to be on the roster. And I'm giving one of my last roster spots to Luke Gifford, who has performed well in the preseason, and he's just a guy that keeps fighting his way onto this roster year after year after year. And so I'm going with him there. And so I absolutely love this linebacker room. Very speedy, good tackling ability. The upside is for sure there in the linebacker room. Let's now go to the corners, where I do think they wanted a corner. I mean, you can still tell this is a weakness. I like Trayvon Diggs a lot, but I do think they were planning on taking a corner, and the plans fell through. They did take a corner in both the second and third round, with Kelvin Joseph coming out of Kentucky and Sean Wright coming out of Oregon State. But Trayvon Diggs is an absolute stud, and I think he truly has the opportunity to prove why he's a number one defensive player on the cornerback position, because he is very good at moving his hips, very explosive, can hang with anybody. I feel like he has great mirroring ability, and that's why I believe he potentially can be a number one corner one day. They're holding on to Anthony Brown and Jordan Lewis, guys. It's unbelievable that they're still on the team. They've been here for a long time, but they've been okay when given opportunities. But I just think that eventually their time's going to be up when they pick a guy like Kelvin Joseph, who has the ability as well to cover man-to-man, and then Sean Wright, who has performed relatively well in the preseason, good amount of tackling ability there. I have them keeping C.J. Goodwin on the practice squad. He's going to be here for special teams if he does make the roster, so potentially still could. They brought in Maurice Kennedy last year, but he ended up opting out. So interesting corner room here. I do think they would have wished they had a corner, because could you imagine Diggs with either J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain? That would be insane. But instead, we'll take the future with Joseph. But that's a decent corner room. They're just kind of swinging darts at the boards there. Then the safety position filled with depth, which is what you'd like to see. I have them keeping 4 safeties here. So let's start with Donovan Wilson, who is a hard hitter, one of the hardest hitters in the league. I think very underrated player, and it's nice to have him, potentially just be the hard hitter, make some big tackles. And then DeMonte Kazee, who's familiar with Dan Quinn on defense, to be more of a coverage ball hawk player. They also bring in Malik Hooker as well as a free agent, who I think can do the same thing, just be a ball hawk on the defense. And then Jaron Kearse is another hard hitter who can actually cover relatively well. I thought that was a good signing. So 3 of their 4 guys they bring in new this year, and I like absolutely all of them having 2 and 2, basically 2 hard hitters, 2 coverage players. I like that a lot, and it kind of then makes Darian Thompson start to run out of room. They also have Israel Mukuamu, who they took late in the draft as well this year. So they have a lot of options at safety with different skill sets. So I really like this safety room. And then the special teams, they reunite 2 of the 3 Rams former special teamers. And then they also bring in Brian Anger this year to be the punter. But Greg Zuerlein is still one of the best kickers in the league. Thought that was a great signing when they made it. Brian Anger, an okay punter, I would say. But Jake McQuaid, a great long snapper as well. Familiarity with Greg Zuerlein, so good to put those 2 together. I'm keeping Hunter Niswander as a punter on the practice squad. He obviously didn't perform well as a kicker for the Hall of Fame game, but that's because he was playing out of position. What other option did you have? I don't really know, so I'm keeping him around there. And then I have them cutting the kicker they just signed today. So, solid special teams unit as well. So, solid defense overall. I think that the upside is there with a lot of young players. Let's talk about their schedule, where you're going to see a lot of 50s if you're new to this series. I put 50-50 games, basically, where I say I think they're going to win one of those 2 games in the color code. So, for example, yellow goes with the yellow, so the Eagles go with the Eagles in this case. And they could be matched together based on maybe it's the same team, maybe it's 2 away games, 2 home games, 2 teams with similar ranks. I also give automatic wins and automatic losses based on the rankings, and this might be the fewest amount of losses automatically that we've had so far, because once you start getting in the middle here, it's going to be harder to really be much higher than a whole ton of other teams or lower. So they start with the Bucs to kick off the season. Very tough game overall. Then we have some winnable games here. Chargers are really tough as well. That's a borderline game. But then you get a nice stretch between the Eagles, the Panthers, and Giants, all winnable. The Patriots are going to be relatively tough. Early bye week. Don't love that for a team fighting for the playoffs. They also have the Vikings, the Broncos, the Falcons. Tough game against the Chiefs. The Raiders, the Saints, the football team. Giants football team. So football team twice in 3 weeks. A few division games. Cardinals are tough. And then the Eagles. So they do have 4 division games of the last 5 games. So this division is wide open. Anybody can win it, and that's why you're going to see a lot of 50s. And just like last episode, the win total is going to stay at 10. I feel like that's pretty accurate. I like Dak. We just need to see him at full strength. And I honestly, just in conclusion, don't think Mike McCarthy is a good enough coach to take this team to the playoffs. So I have them going with Dak Prescott as the offensive player of the year. He bounces back from the injury, and he still has an elite season, even if he is dealing with some other injuries. I have DeMarcus Lawrence winning the Defensive Player of the Year. I still think he's a number 1 edge rusher and offers a lot of ability. You also could potentially see Jalen Smith there. My breakout player of the year, I decided not to go with CeeDee Lamb or Trayvon Diggs, even though I both think they take a huge step up, like immensely take a step up. I am thinking they already had a pretty good season, and they've kind of already broken out, in my opinion. But if you want a higher breakout, go with CeeDee Lamb or Trayvon Diggs. I totally see that. I think both will happen. But I'm going to go with Neville Gallimore. I like to pick guys that are kind of sleepers under the radar for these breakout players. So I'm going to go with Neville Gallimore, finally given the opportunities to be a number 1 defensive tackle. And then rookie of the year, Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons is an absolute beast, and I think he not only will be an impact, but potentially change his defense around and be very flexible with the position. That's what you need, I guess, on this team, given what they have, because he can be an impact edge rusher and linebacker. So I really think he's going to perform well. So thank you so much for watching this far into the video, and I will see you in the next episode.